You ready?
Yes, sir.
Then let us podcast.
Go podcast. Woo!
Hello and welcome to Shadow of the Cast, a Marvel Champions podcast. I'm Villain Theory,
I'm Nelson.
and if you haven't heard, we have a new expansion on the horizon. There's been an announcement, there's been kind of a reveal article, and it looks really, really cool. What do you think, Nelson?
Oh my goodness, I was so excited. We kind of knew that Apocalypse was going to be hitting our tables here soon, just from the end of the Next Evolution campaign booklet or campaign storyline. But we got some cool stuff to talk about. So real quick, what are you most excited to talk about in this episode? I guess before we open it up.
Oh, I'm torn. I really like some of the aspect cards actually,
Ooh,
but there's
okay.
also this little modular set called Standard Free, and I got so excited when I first saw that. I recorded my live reaction to that, so some people listening have probably seen that, and I
Yeah,
was like, "What? They did it!
they did it. They did it.
That
We're
was
going to dive
cool.
into all of that and more. But one of the things that we do on the episode is we have community questions. So if you have a question that you want us to discuss, you can send those questions into shadowofthecast@gmail.com or comment below on the YouTube video if you're watching there. But well, I think we're going to be talking about a lot. Let's just dive right into it. So, Villain, tee us up.
Yeah, so interestingly, I'm going to maybe go for a brief detour, but it is kind of related here. So, Age of Apocalypse is the new expansion, and to me, this kind of looks like the darkest chapter, story-wise in Marvel Champions. But what the listeners won't know is this might be the darkest chapter in our podcast, because we might have to change the podcast name here, because Shadow of the Past might be old news. Ooh,
Yeah,
there's kind of
yeah.
a replacement in that standard free set. So
Yep.
uh, but no, I'm really excited to talk about all of that. I think what I don't know if I asked you, but what was your favorite thing? What really grabbed you from the your first read through of the article?
So I had a interesting kind of journey with this article because it came out on Thursday. We knew it was coming out on Thursday. This is one of the first times, at least since I've been in the content creator space, that they have kind of told us exactly when that article is coming out. So I was sitting there ready to make my video. And the way that I do videos is I have a heroes and then a villain video. But the problem is that Thursday I was driving to Louisiana, which is about 12 hours away. We ended up not making it the entire way. So I just read the heroes. I skipped everything villain related and just skipped down to the bottom so I could make the hero video. And so the first thing that popped out to me was magic. Magic just looks incredibly powerful and fun to play. And then on my drive is when I was reading the villains, and Apocalypse, well, you took Standard 3 as your favorite. That one looks really, really sweet. But Apocalypse looks like, I say this in my villain video, that Hela and Magneto had like a child of a scenario together. And those are two of my favorite scenarios. So I'm really excited to see what Apocalypse brings.
Yeah, I'm very excited about Apocalypse, and I'm very excited about Magic. When I did my kind of live kind of reaction view of it, Magic really stood out to me more than Bishop, who is the other hero that they previewed.
Mm-hmm.
On reflection, I'm kind of torn between them. In some ways, I'm feeling more drawn toward Bishop at the moment, but there's a lot of months to release that. It's probably going to go back and forth. But
Yeah.
Magic is really cool. Talk to me about why Magic is unique.
So Magic, if you have played Lord of the Rings, Magic is the Gandalf hero. So you play with the top card of your deck face up, and then you also get a discount to play that card, and you can play the top card of your deck once per phase, as if it was in your hand. You get a discount of 1. So Magic, who has a hand size of 5 in hero form, really has a hand size of 6, and then she's also, I think, one of the coolest parts from a deck building perspective. She's mutant, X-Men, and Mystic traded. So she has a couple of the more powerful keywords or the traits in the game. So we can go like Sorcerer Supreme, and now she has a 7 hand size in hero form with a discount of 1 to play that top card. She has Spiritual Meditation. She has ways to cycle her deck. And I feel like she's just going to be a character that if you need a specific solution to a problem that's being presented, she'll figure it out. She's going to be able to get there and have just an easy time with whatever is being presented to her. But that's kind of her main gimmick, is the fact that in hero form she plays with the top card of her deck face up, and then she gets a discount to play that card. So it's going to be I feel like that's just really strong.
Really strong is exactly how I think about it as well. And what's crazy is I don't think she necessarily has like a hand size of 6. If you have the right card on top of your deck and you have ways to kind of play around with that, she has a support card called Limbo, which lets you swap something. If you have a card that you can play in the villain phase, you're going to get to play, for -1 cost, a card in the villain phase. Then you can play a card from top of your deck, in the hero phase. And you could still, if they were 1 cost each, still have 5 cards, left in your hand, which is... I think in my video, I call it, she kind of can have 2 helicarriers and 2 Avengers Mansions. Which isn't exactly correct, but it's also...
But it's very similar.
It seems very strong. And have you considered, Cosmo with Magic yet?
Yep. That was not something that immediately came to my mind. I don't remember if I called it out in the video, but I know we have had discussions around Cosmo where even after they have nerfed Cosmo, where you can only target one of the encounter player decks, you never miss. You never miss with Magic, because you play with the top card of your deck face up. So Cosmo is going to be really fun. You were saying cards that we can play in the villain phase. So, perfect defense, defensive strategies. A lot of those 1 cost defensive events are now 0 cost defensive events. And the Limbo support that you alluded to earlier has an action where you can swap a card in the player phase, or a response where you can swap the card after the villain phase starts. So you kind of get a little bit of fixing. So if you draw that desperate defense, throw it on the top of your deck, you can play it for 0 cost. You still have 5 cards in your hand. It's so good. It's so incredibly strong.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And all those other cards, not just Cosmo, like Hulk, you can, the Hulk ally is going to be really good. There's a ton of kind of things like that. And just like what you're saying, the traits, Mystic and Mutant, and then X-Men, I'm very excited. And I know my partner loves, Mystics, and, she likes Domino, and she messes with the top of the deck as well. So I think she's going to enjoy that character immensely. And I don't know when I'll get to play her, but nonetheless, I think she looks really cool. Anything else you want to say about Magic that's kind of coming to mind?
Yeah, so one of the other things that she works with, which kind of plays off the top card of her deck mechanic, is her stat line is a little bit lower than what I would like to see normally. It's a 1-2-2. Typically, I'm really looking for a sum of 6 across those stats, right? And we get 5, but she has a couple of upgrades. She has her crown, her armor, and her sword, which give her stat boost based on the top card of her deck. So if you have a physical, then you get +1 attack based on your sword, and then you also get other bonuses like Retaliate or Steady. And then if it's a wild, she gets plus to all of the stats. So she's coming up with 2-3-3. And so now we're looking at 2-3-3 with 7 hands. It's like, okay, cool. That's fun. So I do think that there is going to be some tendency to lean towards the wild resources, especially if you're leaning into kind of the basic activation strategy with Magic, because you want those wild resources on the top to get stat boost to everything, or you want to flood it with resources that if you're playing, I just thought about the Hone Technique build, because if you're playing like Hone Technique, you want a lot of mental resources, which is going to help her with her thwarting, which is going to also give you mental resources from Hone Technique. There's just a lot going on with Magic that she's going to be, I think, a very dynamic character to build for.
Yeah, I'm really excited as well. Those upgrades are really interesting. In my mind, I'm thinking I might only play one of them on the ones that I really care about.
Yeah.
Like since I'm in multiplayer and I'm aggression, maybe I just focus on the sword and I can build like a physical oriented kind of deck or something. There's so many possibilities with that. Hone Technique is really interesting. And some of the mystic cards, like the aspect ones, like summoning spell, they make you discard from the top of your deck. But you can use one of her own cards called Stepping Disc to put a magic card from your discard pile on top. So you can kind of, if you're summoning, I don't know, let's say Captain Marvel from your deck, and accidentally half your deck is now in a discard pile, maybe you can like take the upgrade you really want, maybe the sword, put that on top of your deck, and then you can play it from the top of your deck. So I think that's a really fun kind of interaction. And it's interesting talking about the stat lines as well, because One, thwarting is, I would say out of all the, stats, thwarting, attack, and defense, thwarting is the one I care about most, and it is her
Yep.
lowest one. And I wonder if they're going to do anything like what they did with Colossus in terms of, that being the weakness.
Yeah. And it definitely seems like they're setting it up that way. There's nothing other outside of her crown, which gives her a +1 thwart if you have a missile on the top of the deck. There's nothing that really has thwarting in there. So if she doesn't get a thwarting card, that really hinders her power potential. But I feel like deck building is going to be able to get around that fairly easily. We got a lot of
Absolutely.
manipulation. Yeah, so I am kind of curious, how often do you think you're going to be going to alter ego to because she has a interrupt, which I misread in my video, but whenever she changes to hero form from alter ego, she gets to choose a spell, put it on top of your deck. So you kind of get to choose what card is going. But outside of that interrupt, we haven't really seen any reasons to flip down. She's the 3 recovery, hand size is 6, which is effectively the same hand size that she has in, maybe even a little worse than in hero form. But I'm curious what your thoughts on her alter ego side are.
Yeah, I mean, I think just because it has the mutant trait, it's going to be quite good, honestly.
That's fair.
It's tricky because, you get that 6 hand size, but then you flip down and you're going to turn the top card of your deck up, but you miss the villain kind of advantage. So it kind of depends how you build your deck, and we still don't know all of her cards. So she has a lot of stuff that she can play in the villain phase, but your alter ego, that's going to make the alter ego,
Right.
a lot less appealing. But I do think it's going to be, pretty useful. I think, I mentioned summoning spell of all the aspect, spell cards. I think that one is very strong. And if that's my discard pile and I go from alter ego to hero, I can just get that back. That
Sure.
I think is going to be a very powerful strategy. But if you're not building into it, then it's probably not going to be, because it turns off the Sorcerer Supreme upgrade as well. That's only the hand size if you're in hero form. So I think that's a pretty big blow to order. So gonna have to fill it out. But, I can see myself using it, but maybe not for every deck.
Yeah. That'll be interesting. You did allude to Colossus having, a low thwart stat, that kind of being his weakness in the Mutant Genesis box, where she has a signature ally that's Colossus that does not have a low thwart stat. I like this signature ally, 3 cost 2/2/3 with toughness, but the interrupt, kind of playing off the armor up card that Colossus has in his kit. When an enemy attacks you, you can play Colossus from your hand, declare him as the defender without exhausting him. Because of the way that her ability is worded, this can come from the top of your deck because you play it as if it was in your hand. So you can play this. This is effectively a 2-cost ally coming into play, and then you have a ready full block because of the tough 2/2 ally ready to go. I think that's pretty strong. And what are your thoughts on Colossus? Then I have another question.
Well, for any listeners who aren't aware, we should probably mention that in the comics, in the lore, that they are actually, siblings, Magic and Colossus. So I do wonder if they're going to have a team up card. And I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that because we haven't seen anything yet. But I love that ally. This is one of my favorite signature allies. I feel like I've seen it in a while because I really like Pip the Troll from Adam Warlock, who also has an interrupter that you can play him. Now, Pip can be played on other people, whereas Colossus has to defend you. And his flavor text does talk about defending, magic. So, it makes sense. I do find it funny that he has better thwarting than Colossus himself. Colossus can get up to 2 thwarting, but, it's... But yeah, just the interrupt and the way it interacts with your hero ability. So you can use that limbo support card we've been talking about to swap Colossus on top of your deck. And then, super cheap block. And because he doesn't exhaust to defend, ready to go. So it's incredible tempo. I think it's going to be hard not to play Colossus almost every time you see him.
Yeah. And to point out, you can put Colossus on the top of your deck with Limbo. You have to put, I'm thinking Stepping Disc because you can choose a magic card in your discard pile that includes Colossus. Colossus is a wild card, so you can use Stepping Disc, put Colossus, get all your stat boost, then play Colossus. There's going to be a lot of really fun manipulation, a lot of really fun, swapping these cards out for whatever you need to play. But Colossus feels like a really strong card. I'm excited for Magic. You said you were a little bit more excited at the moment for our other hero, Bishop. Tell me a little bit about Bishop.
Yeah, Bishop is a weird character.
Yeah.
He's 12 health. In some ways, his stat lines are reminiscent of, you could say Cable, and, he does have a rifle like Cable. But in some ways, he's very much like Captain Marvel 2.0, but not a copy per se, but more of an evolution or taking, inspiration from. So he's a character that is all about resources. And resources are pretty good as long as you've got the right thing for them to pay for, which is going to be the trick with Bishop. So Bishop's main, kind of gimmick, kind of, his whole thing is he wants to take damage from an attack, and then he gets to discard cards equal to that damage. And if it's a resource, he adds it to his hand. So potentially, you can get very rich by taking a villain attack. You're effectively absorbing their energy is the whole kind of thing going on there, which in the comics, that's kind of very similar to Captain Marvel's power.
Yeah, Bishop hurts my brain a little bit. Both of these characters, to some extent, start to mess with the cost curve discussion that we've had previously, where, how many resources do you want to have in your deck? What is the effective or the efficiency that you want to see from cards where you're getting discounts with Magic playing the top? Bishop just has all of the resources, and then a lot of his cards play off of how many resources he has in his hand. So you have cards like his rifle, which you alluded to earlier, where it deals damage based off the number of resources you have in your hand. But then on the other side of the equation, if you have 5 resources in your hand, you don't have anything to do. So Bishop's one of those that I have had a really hard time kind of judging how strong he will be. And I'm excited to kind of, I feel like I'm going to need to play him a good bit to understand exactly how to build for him and how many resources. But I guess like asking the expert deck builder here, how many resources are you going to put in your first Bishop deck?
Ooh, that's how many my first one. The number I've been pulled toward is 10 to 12, which is way above what I would normally ever recommend. And I'm not going to, swear by, like, I think that is the perfect amount for him, because I agree. I think I'm going to need to play him and get a feel for it. But in my head as a deck builder, I'm thinking, okay, 10 to 12 resources, and I'm going to throw in every resource think I can possibly find, and, see what happens, see how it goes. And it's tricky because in some ways you're lowering, you're making your potential worst turn, even worse. The more resources you have in, the more often you might have a completely unplayable hand, which is a nightmare. Now, on a lot of scenarios, especially on standard, you can kind of get away with a non-turn here or there. But, an expert against a high pressure villain or something, that is very bad news. So it's going to be tricky. But the thing is, I think if you don't put that many resources in, his ability is going to miss quite often, which is quite sad. And then his events, might not, the rifle and all that might not be hitting that well. So it's going to be pretty tricky to, find the right balance of that risk and reward.
Yeah, it's gonna be something, because if you do resource flood, as long as you have the rifle out, you have at least 5 damage. And I'm trying to find it because someone commented on my video, and I'm going through trying to figure it out. But they were just saying, if you have 5 resources in game, just don't discard your hand. Just 5 damage plus your attack for 2 is 7 damage. If you just hang on to those resources, 14 over 2 turns is pretty decent. And if you're taking damage in the villain phase and getting more resources, then your rifle looks to be doing more. Because there is not a limit for Bishop's rifle. So a lot of the times, like with Cable's rifle, it's limited to 4. Whereas like if you have 10 resources in your hand, rifle's hitting pretty hard.
Yeah, there's going to be some weird strategies here. So we've also got the Bishop's Uniform card, which will heal him per the resources. So you're not just getting that damage every turn if you hold the resources, but you can guarantee that healing from the uniform. So I was actually watching D20 stream a few days ago, and he was saying he really wants to try that. He wants to hold on to these resources and see what happens. And I think that's something we're all going to have to do. I'm wondering if there is a weird strategy, and this has just popped onto my head, talking about it, but if what you do is maybe you only put like 3 or 4 resources in your deck, but whenever they come into your hand, you never get rid of them. Yeah. And, maybe, just one, or, you just cycle 1 or 2 cards that you play every turn and then keep a couple of resources to keep stuff online. I don't really think that's going to pay off too much, but kind of maybe. It's a really interesting puzzle, and you can probably do some really weird stuff with it. So I am very excited. And I have to imagine that because he's all about resources, we're going to get a new, resources in his precon, hopefully.
Oh, that is interesting. Also, real quick, I did find it as BN5055 that commented on the video to talk about the just, heal 5, deal 5 every single turn. That seems pretty good. But yeah, I am excited to see what new resources, because I assume we're going to get some new aspect and or basic ones. But he also comes with his own double, which is stored energy. It's a temporal card. It's a lightning punch resource double. And he's going to have more than one because the article does you could wind up with a bunch of stored energy. Now we have only seen that he has one, but a bunch of to me sounds like three.
Well, I've done the nerdy thing of looking at the little numbers in the corners, and
Yeah.
it's basically guaranteed free because they have numbers to say this is, what stored energy is. It's this number, and we have the next number on from that. So every other card between them is going to be
Yeah.
a copy of stored energy. So
Okay.
it is. He's going to have three of them. Yeah, really cool card. It's kind of in some ways a double resources. I don't like to say this, but kind of bland. But because he runs off resources, it's going to feel really good. Every time that enters your hand. And
Yep.
because it's got the temporal trait, we should probably talk about his alter ego ability.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the temporally displaced. So it's after you change to Lucas Bishop, the alter ego form, you can add a temporal card to your discard from your discard pile to your hand. So that could be a lot of his cards, his signature allies have temporal, but also his stored energy is temporal traded. So you can just grab a double whenever you flip, which is cards in a card game is good, and doubles are even better. So I like it.
I think it's going to be very good, and I really want to play him with cables. They can body slide around and just get those. I think that's going to be really fun. It's really interesting. I'm just going to go completely off topic for a second here, and I'm curious for your thoughts. What I wanted to talk about is in the previous expansion, we had one hero who was like a time traveling soldier, and then one hero who played with the top of their deck. And now I kind of feel like we've kind of got that again, and I'm really curious if that was intentional or kind of how that happened. They are distinct. I think they were playing in distinct ways, but I do think it's pretty curious.
Yeah. And even to that extent, Cable and Bishop kind of scale. They scale differently, but they also scale based on number of side schemes or number of resources that you have in your hand. So that's cool. I didn't draw that parallel. That's fun. I like that a lot. With Bishop, we talked about some of wanting resource sinks. So just off the top of my mind, the basic ones: Lockjaw, Machine Man, any other resource sinks that you are throwing in pretty much every single Bishop deck you build.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few. And now that I think about it, I don't think I put this in my video, but you could even have a Yarnborn, as an option.
Yep.
But I think for leadership, which seems really good with him, even a card like Make the Call, if you have expensive allies in your discard pile, you can kind of, make the call into a resource sink for however many resources you have going spare. And, I say resource sink, usually resource sinks are kind of, lower value than you would kind of expect to get, but they're always there as an outlet, for your resources. But Make the Call is kind of, I would say, if we were to rank cards, it's got to be S tier. It's like, it's very, very strong. So that's going to be a really good method. And also looking forward to the, for similar reasons, the Black Panther ally, because he can hold an event that you could pay for when you need to, pay for something. So I think those are kind of some cool different options.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we both talked about in our videos, respectively, was strength in numbers for Bishop. You didn't talk about it?
Okay. I didn't talk about it. You talk about it. You
Anyway,
like
strength in numbers, you get to exhaust allies and draw this number of cards. So the other way that you can offset a resource flooded hand is to have more cards in your hand. And so I also think, Avengers Mansion or ways to draw cards, X Bunker, these types of things are going to be really strong for Bishop because you're going to be able to hold on to 5 resources, exhaust 4 allies, draw 4 cards, and you're going to be able to play all of them probably.
So many, honestly, it's in some ways I feel like it's similar to Psylocke, who starts with that lower hand size but lots of resource generation. So it's not exactly the same, but there are some parallels, which is going to be fun. Yeah, I like strength in numbers, forgot to mention it. But yeah, card draw in general is going to be really fun for him. So yeah, I am really, really excited. And he's also, we should mention, the second hero to ever have 2 signature allies.
Yeah. So he's got 2 signature allies that kind of follow the same form as each other. There's Malcolm and Randall. Randall's the stronger thwarter, Malcolm's the stronger attacker, and they both have a response that says you can an action. I'm sorry, that you can discard a card from your hand to ready Malcolm or Randall, and then if it has a printed physical for Malcolm or a printed lightning for Randall, you get to heal 1 damage from them. So these are fine. I don't think that they are super exciting to me. What are your thoughts on here? They're both 3 costed. I like Randall more just because of the thwarting. You can thwart a lot. I guess you could Voltron him a little bit and have just multiple readies. That could be kind of fun. But, I think they're strong, but not super flashy. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, they're definitely very practical, but putting upgrades on them was one of my first thoughts. Their ability, which readies them, and if you pair with the right resource type, heals them for one. It's very reminiscent of Game Time, which is a card I really enjoy. So I do think there are some really fun things you can do with Bishop Signature allies. Now, unfortunately, I need to interrupt the podcast here. This is Villain Theory, body sliding in from the future, or maybe time slipping, as you whatever you prefer. Unfortunately, we've had an issue with kind of the last half of the audio of the podcast. And by issue, I mean it kind of didn't record. So while we kind of have a backup, it's very, very bad quality. And long story short, that branch of the timeline has effectively been pruned. So I know that's going to disappoint some people. So I do apologize. But I will try to summarize the points about the villains that me and Nelson talked about. We really liked Unis, the first villain of the expansion preview. We have no idea who he is. But we really like his gene pool side scheme that starts in play. It's permanent. And what that does is discourage you from blocking with allies. If you block with allies, you have to add threat to the side scheme. On its own, that does nothing. But it means Unis gets more powerful, and it means his encounter cards get more powerful. And that's really cool. So it's bringing kind of a new deterrent to blocking with allies, which I think we both agreed was maybe, it's a little bit too good in general. And it doesn't stop you from blocking with them at all, though. It's not quite as bad as Project Wide Awake, where you have a very limited capacity to do that. So we thought that was really fun. And our favorite part was that you can take that side scheme, that gene pool side scheme, and put it on other villains because it's actually part of the Infinite modular set. So we really liked that. With the Four Horsemen, we didn't have as much information. There are Four Horsemen that we have seen, and they have really nasty force responses when they attack. So we were kind of theorizing, maybe alter ego is good to avoid that kind of thing. But we don't have a lot of information about that scenario. We don't know, how the active villain is decided and so on. So it wasn't a great deal, but we did really like the look of it, and we thought it looked like one of the more difficult scenarios shown, especially because of one of the encounter cards, which is called Rough Riders, which basically means the force responses on the villains, which, the things that really scare us, basically gets triggered, then another villain's, force response that also scares us then gets triggered as well. Lastly, we talked about Apocalypse, which Nelson, I think, mentioned near the start of this video, and it might not surprise you guys to know we both really like him as well. So Apocalypse is kind of defeated by working through his schemes, a little bit like Hela, but we don't know what the big minions coming in, like Hela's large minions, are going to be. They're called the Prelates, and Unis is also a Prelate, so probably going to be similar to him in terms, they're kind of Apocalypse's lieutenants of some kind, but we don't know what they're going to do. And yeah, we're both really looking forward to it, but we need more information. So while it is sad we don't have the final half of the podcast, something me and Nelson realized talking afterwards, we've repeated the same information we said there in a few places. We both have a video on the villains. We did a roundtable discussion together along with Astrodar and Steve from Play the Game. So we've spoken about the villains and different things several times in different places. So if you guys are really interested in hearing more from us, I recommend a video on Nelson's channel called the Content Creator Roundtable. So you'll hear us talk about all these kind of topics in full detail. Unfortunately, it is not in podcast format, so if you prefer to hear things in podcast form, I do apologize. This is kind of the next best thing. And as ever, if you guys have any questions, please send them in to shadowofthecast@gmail.com, or if you're on YouTube, please let us know in the comments. We read all of them. I reply to all of the YouTube comments. I need to get better at replying to my emails, but thank you so much to anyone who has ever sent one in, and it's very much appreciated. Next episode is going to be on Deadpool and X-23. The new hero release is coming up very, very soon. So really excited about that. We'll probably talk about the pool aspect on a separate episode. So from me and on behalf of Nelson, have a great day. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.